Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 4 of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. If you guys enjoy this what if, and want to see part 5 of it, comment down below, and let me know. Then go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Bakugo was disappointed, but also impressed. On one hand, he was disappointed he wouldn't be able to have a proper one-on-one match against his brother. On the other, he was incredibly impressed by the display of power from both. Considering the extreme damage done to the arena, it would be a long time before Iida's match against Shiozaki, and even longer before his own match against Kirishima. However, he was annoyed it took so long for Todoroki to take his brother seriously, and almost lost as a result of it. Regardless, he got up and left with not a word to either Kaminari or Kirishima, who were sitting next to the explosive boy. The other two boys looked at each other, but didn't want to antagonize the irritable Bakugo, as it was considered common knowledge to try and not annoy him. Well, not knowledge, but more common sense. Basic survival instinct. Anyway, Bakugo had gotten up and had started going down to the infirmary when along the way he saw Endeavor, who seemed mildly happy but somewhat annoyed. It was weird, and he put it down to Todoroki using his fire, something that he hasn't done in combat beforehand, evidently much to his father's dismay. He admired the number 2 hero for his raw power and strength, along with their brutal technique, but was not a fan of the way he interacted with other people, nor the hero's willingness to sacrifice others' lives. Whilst Bakugo knew he was definitely not one to judge the way people interacted, this was definitely something Todoroki did not deserve to be treated so badly for. Todoroki would have to manage his family troubles on his own. Right now, Bakugo's brother was worse for wear, and he needed to go check on him. He rushed through the canteen, headed to the door, but quickly picked up a couple of iced teas from the vending machine. One for him, one for Izuku. His brother would need the sugar and caffeine. Once he picked up the drinks, he continued to Recovery Girl's temporary nurse office for the day. At some point along the way, Iida joined him, after defeating Shiozaki in a matter of moments, having had simply pushed the vine-haired girl out of the arena. He was worried about both Izuku and Uraraka, the latter still recovering from her injuries from her bout against Bakugo. The blue-haired boy was worried, but did not attempt to interact with Bakugo, as the two continued on their short journey. Eventually, they wound up outside of the temporary office and knocked, with Bakugo knocking somewhat more violently, much to Iida's dismay. When the door opened, Recovery Girl looked up at them and sighed. "Are you two injured as well?" "No, we are just here to visit our injured classmates, if we may," Iida responded, before Bakugo could start screaming. "Very well, but keep your voices down so they can rest properly," Recovery Girl responded, directing the last part at Bakugo. She had not forgotten him from the first day, or the USJ incident. Bakugo knew this and made a TSK noise as he ignored the hero, and went round to where the students were. Uraraka was almost completely recovered, and just regaining her energy. Todoroki was sitting up with his left arm bandaged, whilst it healed, and a conflicted look in his eyes, and Izuku was still unconscious. Thankfully without burns, still but twitching slightly as some lightning continued to arc off of him, the excess energy not being controlled in his unconscious state. As a result, he was put further away from the others, in a special area for students that have issues such as this, but primarily the area was fireproof, but also sealed off from electrical appliances, and everything nearby was slightly more durable. Bakugo sighed and pulled a chair up near his brother's bed, and tuned the television into the sports festival, ignoring Uraraka and Todoroki. He placed the other iced tea onto a bedside table that was next to his brother, and watched President Mick introduce Mina and Tokoyami. It would probably a drawn-out fight, albeit one-sided. He sighed and, ignoring the slight tingles he got whenever an arc touched him, reached into his brother's pocket and grabbed a notebook and one of the pens. He turned to one of the new pages and started writing some basic notes on the fight, although any notes compared to Izuku's notes on quirks and battles could be considered basic. He sat by his brother's twitching body as the lightning slowly died down with the energy being drained, until eventually he had to go to the waiting room for his own fight against Kirishima. Knowing his brother probably wouldn't wake up in time for it, he made a note in the notebook to watch that fight at home, and set up the next page for Iida's fight against Todoroki, leaving the notebook open on that page and left, without saying a word. The door slammed behind him, and the only sound heard from the 3 classmates who were awake, after previously engaging in light discussion regarding their tactics and mistakes with the aloof Todoroki, even making a comment here and there, was a "ha" from Uraraka. In the time they had known the explosive blonde, they would not have expected anything approximating the behavior just witnessed from him. They quickly snapped out of the brief daze and returned to discussion, a glance thrown towards the unconscious Izuku intermittently. As Bakugo closed the door, he managed to run into a certain energetic blue-haired girl, flanked by the emo and the cartoon boy, the girl ignoring the others scolding her for getting lost, and managing to run into someone. She quickly gave an apology before returning to drag her friends along to the infirmary. Bakugo ignored what they were doing and just grunted, lost in his own thoughts as he planned his battle tactic. By the time Bakugo had made it to his designated waiting room, there were only a few moments before President Mick called him out to do battle with Shitty Hair. He would have to go on the continuous offensive for this bout in order to wear down Shitty Hair's defense. It probably wouldn't be difficult, but time-consuming. A battle of endurance. As soon as midnight yelled go, Bakugo began charging at Kirishima, propelled by explosions from his feet. He brought one hand forward, ready to unleash an explosion as Kirishima began hardening his arms, ready to block best he could. Despite this, Bakugo continued with his charge and started with a moderately sized explosion. Not small, but not enough to immediately knock Kirishima out of bounds. It barely left a scratch on Kirishima as a result of their quirk, but it confirmed Bakugo's theory. Landing behind the red-haired boy, he put his hands together, both sparking with small explosions as he prepared his attacks. He knew if he made a single large explosion, Kirishima would probably be able to tank it. But if he made dozens of decent-sized explosions, eventually Kirishima's armor would crack. And so the barrage begun. Alternating his hands to make sure he didn't completely render one useless, the barrage of explosions ceased after probably the 23rd, and Bakugo let his hands rest, whilst the smoke cleared. Once he did, it revealed a Kirishima with his arms beginning to bleed, his stance shaky. Bakugo smirked, and fired a final large explosion off with his right hand, successfully knocking Kirishima out. Advancing to the semi-finals is Bakugo. Midnight announced, when she could see that Kirishima was no longer moving. Bakugo didn't say a word, and carefully pulled the other boy out of the ground for the medical bots, before following them back to the infirmary with the hope that Izuku was awake. Izuku had woken up sometime towards the end of the fight between Bakugo and Kirishima, and subconsciously reached for his notebook. He had a slight freak out when he realized it wasn't where he kept it normally, but saw it was by the bedside table, along with a note from his brother and an iced tea. Ignoring everything else going on around him, he reached for the notebook and began writing the limited notes he could, about potentially reducing the amount of smoke from Bakugo's explosions, and Kirishima's core clearing itself. Closing the notebook and watching the rest of the fight, he was reaching for the iced tea when he heard Uraraka yelling his name. "Izuku. Are you feeling better now?" she was saying. "Yeah, I'm fine, just a little tired and battered," he replied, still in his own world with his eyes fixed on the screen. "Do you by chance know a Nejire Hato? From the Big Three?" Uraraka asked. Izuku suddenly snapped out of his world, looking over at her. "Yeah, why?" "Well." Uraraka glanced over to Recovery Girl, who was currently talking to an energetic blue-haired girl, flanked by the other members of the Big Three. She was getting increasingly restless, and Recovery Girl's patience was wearing thin. She was on the verge of kicking them out when she noticed Izuku waving to her. She breathed a sigh of relief and told the Big Three that Izuku was awake, before returning to the monitor to see if she needed to prepare for other patients. Izuku waved nervously as the Big Three came over to him, much to Iida, Todoroki, and Uraraka's interest. As far as they knew, Izuku had never met them before, and when they were looking after the class he was in the infirmary. "Oh, Hato-senpai." Izuku started, greeting the blue-haired girl. "Just call me Nejire." Nejire cut him off. "You've saved me twice now, and every time I try to tell you, but both times I passed out before I could." "Oh, sorry about that." "Hey, anyway, I'm Izuku. I don't believe I've met the rest of you before." "Ah, my apologies, Izuku." The cartoonish-looking boy piped up. "I am Mirio Togoda. You've already met Nejire, and the other boy who looks like he wants to hide in a corner is Tamaki Amichiki. We are members of the Big Three." "Oh? Isn't that the group of like, the 3 top students at UA? You basically have dozens of agencies waiting to sign you as soon as you graduate, along with recognition amongst most of the hero community. You're not strong per se, but you've made your quirks incredibly strong with lots of practice. It's an honor to meet you." Izuku spouted, before blushing furiously, after realizing what he did, and hiding in his notebook. Whilst he was reaching for the iced tea, Nejire turned to Uraraka and asked if he was always like this. "Yeah, pretty much." She replied, "He's a big hero and quirk nerd, and he can often go into mumbling sprees. He gets embarrassed easily too, which definitely doesn't help with his awkwardness. Anyway, how does Izuku know you, Nejire?" "Well, he kinda maybe saved me twice." She trailed off, before gesturing to her friends. "They thought I was saved as like, the result of a secret second quirk. But now I can prove he's real." Mirio sighed, and relented as he turned to the blue-haired girl. "Yes, Nejire, you were right. The boy that caught you when you fell from the sky and saved you from the sludge guy is real. Happy now?" Mirio said, causing Izuku to blush more and Nejire to beam. That'll do." Nejire replied, turning to Izuku before being cut off by Iida. "So how exactly did our classmate come across you under circumstances in which you required rescuing?" Iida asked, curious and trying to get an answer after it was previously avoided. "Well, you see," Nejire said, pulling a chair up next to the still twitchy Izuku, who could probably hide in Kirishima's hair, as he began to find the iced tea he was drinking incredibly interesting. "The first time was when I was trying to learn how to fly. I accidentally flew too high and managed to get lost and out of the school. In midair I ran out of energy and crashed headlong into Izuku, who caught me and stopped me from going splat all over the ground. She said, adding sound effects along the way. It was what anyone would have done. Izuku interjected, trying to be mildly less embarrassed. Sure, Nejire said, bringing the attention back to her. The next time he saved me was when I was on the way to school for some extra training, but I got caught by a sludge villain guy thing. And it was turning me into basically a corpse thing, and I wasn't able to react in time to fight back. Luckily, Izuku showed up and pulled me away from the monster before it could do that. Nejire finished, with Izuku smiling sheepishly while still in the bed. He was nervous, and the lingering twitchiness from earlier was not helping in the slightest. Whilst he had come to terms with that, and it would probably remain shaky and twitchy for a little while, the way the conversation between the others and Nejire was going did not help. Nejire turned to Izuku, and was about to say something, when Recovery Girl came in. Uraraka and Todoroki, she said, you two youngsters can go back up and join your class. She told them, before turning to Izuku, you on the other hand still have a few burns, and some nerve damage I can heal, specifically on your left hand, and then you can rest up a bit, before joining your class. Ideally you'll be out in time for the match between Bakugo and Tokoyami, depending on how long Iida and Todoroki's match will take. At the mention of that, Iida and Todoroki shot up, excused themselves and quickly went to their respective waiting rooms. The Recovery Girl walked over to Izuku's side, and kissed his hand, healing it and making him incredibly drowsy in the process. You can sleep, if you like dearie, just make sure you don't charge your quirk for the rest of the day so, if you do accidentally sleep it isn't sparking everywhere. She finished with a stern look and swing of her cane. Izuku laughed sheepishly before turning his attention to Mirio and Tamaki. So why are you two here? He asked them. Well, for starters to help keep Nejire under control, Mirio replied, resulting in Nejire huffing. But also because we were curious about you. Nejire kept. He was suddenly cut off by a hand over his face and a piercing glare, both courtesy of Nejire, and Tamaki quickly started talking, albeit quietly. Sorry about them. TT, they're quite energetic. It's fine, don't worry too much about it. Izuku replied, before turning to Uraraka, you don't want to go back to the rest of the class. Nah, I don't really feel it. Uraraka started responding. She was cut off by Bakugo abruptly storming in, the door swinging open. Recovery Girl scolded him, and he was about to yell at her when Mirio put his hand on Bakugo's shoulder and told him it wasn't worth arguing with the heron. Bakugo glared at her, to which she responded by whacking him with her cane. He flinched, quickly took the hint and pulled up a chair near Uraraka. The two were sitting facing Izuku, with Nejire, Tamaki, and Mirio sitting on chairs on the opposite side. The six of them made light conversation as Izuku slipped in and out of a dozing state, barely capable of staying awake. He quickly chugged the rest of the iced tea, hoping it would be enough to keep him awake. Eventually Recovery Girl kicked them all out as Izuku was good to go, so Mirio, Tamaki and Nejire said their farewells after exchanging numbers and returning to their area. Uraraka followed Izuku to their class seating space, and Bakugo went down to the waiting room before his match began. After sitting down, he looked over the barrier, notebook in hand, ecstatic to watch the next battle. Whilst they were in the infirmary, Iida had lost his match against Todoroki, and Bakugo and Tokoyami were about to begin. It would be an interesting fight, and this would be a good chance to get a better understanding of what exactly Dark Shadow is, and how they work. Izuku watched in eager anticipation as Tokoyami walked onto the stage, with Bakugo facing him down. The moment midnight said go, Tokoyami started on the offensive with Dark Shadow being sent out in a movement to attack and move Bakugo out of the ring. Almost immediately, Bakugo responded with an explosion directed at the shadow creature. Izuku noticed that Dark Shadow seemed to not only be hit back, but also flinch from the source of explosion. Kak-chan will probably figure out the weakness to light, if he gets another attack like that in, and being able to produce blinding explosions, he'll probably be able to win easily, Izuku thought, watching Bakugo fly forward with a burst of speed originating from explosions in his legs. Bakugo, propelled by the rush, directed himself towards Tokoyami. Before he could get within punching range, Dark Shadow had showed up again, and pummeled Bakugo away, towards the edge of the ring. Before he could be completely pushed out, however, Bakugo had blasted Dark Shadow with an explosion that was more light than force. Kak-chan already figured it out. This'll be a very quick bout, if that's the case, Izuku thought, watching Bakugo rush towards Tokoyami the moment he launched the explosion towards Dark Shadow. In less than a few seconds he had pinned Tokoyami by his beak. Izuku wasn't sure what it was anatomically, but whatever it was, it seemed to have successfully caused Tokoyami to surrender as Midnight announced that he had given up. Bakugo released the bird-headed boy, and left towards his designated waiting room for his match against Todoroki. The arena wasn't too badly damaged, but there was still some damage that would need to be repaired. Todoroki had already left for his own waiting room before the match had ended, so Izuku couldn't talk to him in advance, but the green-haired boy hoped that Todoroki would continue to use his fire, despite not using it against Iida. This was mildly disappointing. While Suzuku did hope Todoroki had or would move past his grudge against his father after their match, but it seemed as though Todoroki was facing some internal battles after making the choice he did. Izuku wasn't one to judge others, but he wanted to help best he could, and in this case this probably meant butting his head in. Shrugging it off, he focused on the ring as it was steadily repaired by Cementus. Soon, it was done, and he nodded to the commentator booth where present Mick sat. "Alright everybody," he screamed, much to Aizawa-sensei's dismay, "and here we have the long-awaited final match." He continued screaming, before gesturing to one of the tunnels. "From Class 1A, we have the explosive blonde, Bakugo." Once more screaming, and then gesturing to the other tunnel, "And also from Class 1A, we have the ice and fire user, Todoroki." After he finished screaming, the two boys walked out from their respective tunnels and up to the arena, Bakugo cracking his neck and glaring at Todoroki, whilst the latter glared off into the distance. "Are both fighters ready?" Midnight asked, looking at the two boys. They both nodded, preparing their quirks. "Good luck, fight." And with the crack of a whip, both aspiring heroes launched at each other. Todoroki immediately began creating a massive ice wall, not unlike that seen in his fight against Zero. Bakugo was quickly encased in the ice structure, and there were a few seconds where there was no sign of the explosive blonde, and Midnight was about to announce his loss, when the sounds of explosions began echoing throughout the explosion. "He's tunneling out like a mole," Kirishima exclaimed, as Bakugo emerged with a smoky cloud slightly obscuring the vision of him. "Fight me properly, you half-and-half bastard," he screamed, propelling himself with explosions on his feet. Flying forward, Bakugo directed himself towards Todoroki's left side, resulting in a comment from Present Mick about Todoroki not fighting with his left, and Bakugo having had done his research. Bakugo reached for the other boy, grabbing the left arm and hair of his opponent, and flinging them towards the edge of the ring. "God damn it, fight me properly," Bakugo screamed as he roughly threw the boy. Todoroki was in a brief daze, before constructing an ice slide to stop himself from falling out of the ring. He directed himself back towards Bakugo, reaching across to the blonde boy with his right hand in an attempt to freeze them. Bakugo, in response, swiftly dodged and repeated the earlier action, screaming at Todoroki to properly try. It was clear Todoroki's reluctance to use his fire meant Bakugo felt insulted and undervalued as an opponent, which aggravated him further and caused Bakugo to throw the boy again, but this time also propelled Todoroki towards the edge of the ring with a powerful explosion. Todoroki reacted far faster this time, but needed to put far more effort into his stop page, resulting in a massive ice wall forming behind him, catching him mere centimeters away from the edge. He looked Bakugo in the eyes, and the two boys stared each other down before Todoroki closed his eyes and took a breath. Bakugo took this as a good sign, and propelled himself into the air as he prepared a powerful explosion. He started spinning himself in midair, a smirk plastered across his face. Todoroki, on the other hand, had opened his eyes and pointed his left hand forwards, powerful flames erupting from his left side. Izuku was frantically scribbling notes as the display of fire and bright light intensified. Whilst they were not the unruly display Izuku fought against, it was still a rare use of Todoroki's fire, and he wanted to get all the notes he could. As the flames continued erupting and Bakugo continued rotating to give additional power to the impending explosion, Bakugo launched a massive explosion, larger than the one seen in his fight between him and Uraraka. However, this time it was directed at Todoroki rather than the sky. Todoroki, on the other hand, seemed to be about to release a massive blast of fire, when he lowered his left arm, and instead raised his right, creating a massive stream of ice directed towards Bakugo. When the explosion met the streams of ice, it shattered completely, and the shockwaves sent ice flying in all directions, towards the audience indiscriminately. The smoke from the explosion clouded the arena, and no one had any idea who was still standing. Izuku, clinging on the edge of his seat, leaned over as he listened to Midnight's announcement, who had a position where it was easier to see what had happened of the winner. "Winner by knockout is Bakugo," she announced, as the smoke cleared for the rest of the audience. Bakugo was standing in the middle of the ring, confused and becoming irritated as he noticed Todoroki collapsed in a pile of ice outside of the ring. "You half-and-half bastard," Bakugo screamed at the unconscious boy, "you held back your fucking fire on me." Bakugo continued screaming various profanities and insults as he approached the other boy, grabbing them by the collar, before collapsing in a pile, under the effect of Midnight's quirk. Medical bots swiftly whisked the two away, towards Recovery Girl's office as the crowd began to chatter about what they had just witnessed. The winner of the sports festival just started screaming at the runner-up because they had held back on them. Most were confused by the intentions of the explosive blonde-haired boy, complaining about his win. What else could he want? Well, for his opponent to actually try. There were few in Class 1 that understood this, and Izuku was one of them. He was not looking forward to the walk home, which would probably primarily involve Bakugo griping with more than a few choice swears included. Izuku sighed, and started on his way towards the infirmary. There would be a few speeches before medals were awarded to the top 4 students, Tokoyami and Iida in 3rd, Todoroki in 2nd and Bakugo in 1st. Once he had made it there, Izuku could hear yelling from within. It sounded like Bakugo, unsurprisingly, but he could also hear Recovery Girl's stern replies. Trying not to draw too much attention to himself, Izuku opened the door and looked around. In one bed was Todoroki sitting up, looking at his left arm in a state of internal conflict, doing his best to ignore the arguing student and nurse. Across from Todoroki in his own bed sat Bakugo, hands crackling and left eye twitching as he glared at Recovery Girl and Todoroki. Recovery Girl stood next to Todoroki's bed, tending to the boy who had gotten the short end of the stick in terms of injuries. Just got into the infirmary, and are already picking a fight. Young man, I do hope you will reconsider your actions in the future. Recovery Girl scolded Bakugo. Yeah? Well, I don't give a fuck. Ow, what was that for you, Ow fu. Alright, I'll stop picking fights and swearing. Jeez, Bakugo yelled, with his few choice swear words being met with a whack from Recovery Girl's king. Recovery Girl nodded in satisfaction as she turned back towards Todoroki. You have a few burns from the explosions, and a couple bruises from hitting your ice wall so hard, but other than that you should be fine. Bakugo scat and turned towards Izuku, acknowledging his brother's presence. Hey Izuku. Oh, hey Kacchan. How are you feeling? Izuku questioned. Really freaking ripped off, that's how. Bakugo replied, barely catching his swear, and with the look of disapproval he received from Recovery Girl. She was only going to let this half swear slide once. Bakugo gulped, and continued talking to his brother. Damn, half and half held back on me, and he even looked like he was going to go all out, but decided not to, the damned extra. Izuku laughed nervously, and looked over to Todoroki, who was looking at the two of them with a blank face. I think Todoroki had some personal reasons. Izuku trailed off, with a barely noticeable nod of approval from the stoic boy, who had turned back towards Recovery Girl. Bakugo grunted, and sighed. Izuku took this as a signal to leave, and turned towards the door as he returned back to his classmates. Izuku, his class and the audience all waited in anticipation for the closing of the sports festival, when Midnight's voice cut over the crowd. All right everybody. What a wonderfully youthful showing from our first years. Here to present the medals is UA's newest faculty member, the one and on. I am here to present the medals. All Might announced, cutting off Midnight. He looked at her apologetically before continuing, congratulations to all students today, but of our students, highest congratulations go to these three right here. Wait, three? All Might looked towards Midnight, who explained why there were three instead of four. Iida had to leave early due to family reasoning, Midnight explained, looking almost as confused as All Might. All Might shrugged, and continued, young Tokoyami, you did incredibly well today, however there are some downfalls I believe you have found. Do your best, and work to improve your skills. All Might said, placing a bronze medal around Tokoyami's neck. He nodded in response. Young Todoroki. You two did quite well, however you two found some areas you can improve on, like working on your fire. All Might said, ignoring the stiffening of the boy with bi-colored hair as he placed the silver medal around Todoroki's neck. Young Bakugo. Congratulations on becoming first in today's sports festival. You have an aspiring future as a hero ahead of you. All Might told the blonde boy, who was staring as though All Might wasn't even there. Bakugo simply nodded as All Might placed the gold medal around his neck. Congratulations to everyone who participated today. Everyone has done a spectacular job today. Now, say it with me. Plus ultra. The audience, Izuku and most of class 1 yelled in unison. This was decidedly not All Might's intention. Thank you for your hard work. The man boomed, before realizing his mistake and quickly apologizing as the crowd scolded him. It was amusing, and the man left as President Mick and Midnight began ushering the audience out of the stadium. Izuku and the rest of his class made their way to the designated bus, and were joined by the tournament champions, Iida, and started on their way back to school. Aizawa-sensei informed them there would be a few things to talk about before they would be dismissed for the day, before letting the students rest on the way back home. Bakugo sighed in discontent as his brother's slowing breathing was heard next to his head. He was particularly irritable at the moment, but his brother always knew how to calm him, intentionally or not. He still couldn't believe the audacity of the half-and-half bastard to hold back on him like that. Focusing on Izuku's steady breathing, he did his best to drown out the chatter of his classmates. This was successful to a point, before he heard his name come up in conversation between Raccoon Eyes and Shitty Hair. Roki's and Bakugo's fight was so manly though, it was incredible. Brought a tear to my eye, Shitty Hair said, wiping his cheek as though there were actually tears there. I know right? It was so cool. Raccoon Eyes responded. Not nearly as fabulous or shiny as. Oh, I extra shut the fuck up about the fight of half-and-half bastard against myself. Bakugo screamed, cutting off some extra he could not care less about. It was absolute shit as Icy Hot hardly tried. I will snap your foo. Bakugo. Aizawa-sensei's stern voice cut him off. Keep it down, or you're going to be in detention for the next month. Bakugo was a little nervous. After all, Aizawa-sensei is incredibly intimidating, but just huffed and turned back, before focusing again on Izuku's breathing. How Izuku could sleep through that, but the ever sleep-deprived Aizawa-sensei couldn't was somewhat amazing, but it was somewhat understandable. Izuku's quirk is incredibly draining, and that coupled with Recovery Girl's healing after the burns and injuries he sustained after the fight he had against Icy Hot. Sighing again, he looked forwards at the head of the chair in front, ignoring the world bar his brother, and let himself zone out for the remainder of the trip. Once they reached school, Bakugo gently shook Izuku awake, before following the rest of the class back to their homeroom, where Aizawa-sensei dropped a lot of information on all of them. In 2 weeks from now, we will be introducing a dorm system, was the first bit of information. Wait. So we'll be all living together? The off-brand Pikachu asked. Yes. Now shut up while I finish. Sure, you'll be in detention for the first week of the dorm system. Ah. Sorry. So shut it, Aizawa-sensei sighed before continuing. It will be discussed with your parents over the next few weeks to get permission. So over the next week we will be collecting forms regarding needs, and make sure you have everything packed to basically live on campus for the next 3 years. Sir? Why is UA instituting such a system? Engine Legs called out. Coinciding with the USJ raid, there was also an information raid, and so we would like to make sure all students are safe at all times, and this is one of the easiest ways to do so. Consider it a long-term exercise in cooperativeness and teamwork. After that, he continued to go on to explain the various arrangements for things such as laundry, cooking, bathing and similar, but Bakugo ended up zoning out partway through. He knew his old hag would end up yelling this information at him at some point, and if he really was desperate he could see if Izuku would let him look at whatever notebook the green-haired boy was currently scribbling in. Eventually, Aizawa-sensei dismissed them and Bakugo left with Izuku. The latter had to suffer a lot of choice swear words from the blonde, and was incredibly tired to top it all off. At least sleep would hopefully come easy for the green-haired boy tonight. Izuku yawned as he wiped the sleep out of his eyes, even if it was not much. It was Monday, and so he had to go back to school. Aizawa-sensei had not come over to the Bakugo household this weekend, but based on the excited pings in the class chat, which was currently named Class 1A, at least for the last day, and probably for the next 3 hours if Mina's excessive sociability was anything to go by, he had visited about half the class so far. Everyone's parents had said yes with no question, as they were pleased with the prospect of good protection for their children along with the social aspect, and needless to say everyone was egging their parents to say yes. Izuku had spent the weekend catching up on work he had missed whilst training and preparing for the sports festival, along with some reading, mostly about ancient Japanese mythology. Groggily clambering to the dining room, he mumbled a good morning to his family as he made breakfast for himself. Eventually he had eaten, packed his books and made his way out the door with Bakugo close behind, after the latter finished a screaming match between them and their mother. Bakugo was under threat of being grounded for a week after calling their mother an old hag way too many times, and so he was quick to pack his bags and call it goodbye following Izuku. The two made their way to school and to the class, where they began the grind for the day. Izuku watched the no longer bandaged body of Aizawa-sensei come through the door. After a brief interrogation regarding the lack of injury so quickly, Aizawa-sensei explained that Recovery Girl had done a lot of healing, and that he hadn't really been that injured throughout the whole of the USJ incident. So, first up, we have a special hero logistics class. Aizawa-sensei started explaining, once he finished the explanation about his injuries. Please don't be a test, I haven't studied for any tests, I didn't know there'd be one. Izuku thought before his internal ramblings were cut off by Aizawa-sensei's clarifications. After the sports festival, many hero agencies have extended offers of internships to you first years, so treasure this opportunity. Normally they don't do this, but many of you have impressed them greatly with your skills and abilities displayed throughout the festival. So this is a chance to line up a hero agency for after school. Yuirozu asked. Not quite. This is a chance to prove yourself, as you will need to maintain interest for your career beyond high school. As such, we will hand out the interest sheets, so you can choose where you want to go, but first, if you're going to be patrolling in public, you're going to need. Aizawa-sensei was abruptly cut off by Midnight strolling through the door, much to Grapist's delight, hero names. And because I'm not good at this, Midnight will be here to approve your names before she hands the paperwork to me. With that, Aizawa-sensei began to zip himself up in his sleeping bag and shuffled over to the corner. Alright, here are some whiteboards, write down your ideas and we'll have people come up one by one and present them. Do your best. Midnight announced, handing a small stack of whiteboards to the front of each row. Once Izuku received his, he was at a complete loss. It seemed as though the entire class was at a standoff, waiting to see who would go first when Aoyama stood up, walked to the front, and, with a twinkle in his eyes, announced his hero name. I cannot stop twinkling. Little wordy, maybe cut off the I and marriage cannot into can't, and it'll be passable. Midnight said with a thumbs up. With a slight confidence boost after Aoyama's interesting name was accepted, Mino went up next with the name Alien Queen. Unfortunately for her, Midnight quickly rejected this as it was deemed too scary. The class fell into an awkward silence after that, until Tsu was the next to approach the podium. Rainy season hero. Froppy. She announced. Adorable. Approved. Midnight responded quickly. And with that, the class, one by one, gave names all to be accepted. Eventually Izuku was one of the last few to not have a name, alongside Bakugo, Todoroki and Iida, who had an incredibly conflicted look on his face. Backing his brain, he remembered Tokoyami's name, Tsukiyomi, a Japanese god from an ancient religion. Swiftly, and, albeit messily, he wrote down the characters before making his way to the front. Midori Reiko. Midnight asked Izuku. Midori as in green, Reiko for the god of thunder. He replied, before Midnight nodded and he returned to his seat. He could hear Iida's pen squeaking as the boy finally, as somewhat stressfully, decided on a name. But not before Bakugo had given it his first shot. King Explosion Murder. Bakugo proclaimed. Man, that's way too violent. Kirishima exclaimed, to which Midnight nodded. Indeed, try something else. Midnight told Bakugo, who simply glared at everyone and returned to his seat with a huff. Eventually everyone, bar Bakugo, had come up with some kind of name, and after that Aizawa sensei woke back up and Midnight left. Alright, now that you have your hero names I will come around and hand out the internship paperwork. Please have one filled out by the end of the day, and return it to me. Class is dismissed for lunch, he said, before leaving the room with his sleeping bag under one arm. Bakugo was in a generally grumpy mood as a result, and the teachers had said that if he could not come up with a name they would for him, or he could resort to his own name such as Iida and Todoroki had. As a result, anyone who either valued their life or was not Izuku, steered clear of the explosive blonde. Apparently, there was someone who was both the former and not the latter, that being Kaminari. Hey Bakugo. Why don't you call yourself Explodo? The boy called out, whilst everyone was socializing in various groups. Bakugo visibly twitched, and Izuku placed a firm hand on Bakugo's shoulder. Why the fuck would I do that, you dumbass of an extra? Bakugo screamed, the only reason Kaminari not being out cold was probably Izuku. Nevertheless, Kaminari persevered, well it describes both your quirk and your personality. Izuku simply blinked. Kaminari was either incredibly dumb, or had a death wish. Speaking of that death wish, Izuku was watching his brother igniting his quirk and small explosions in his hands. See? You're only proving my point. Kaminari continued. Kaminari. What are you doing? Izuku asked. Just giving an honest suggestion. Why? Nothing. Just run. Izuku replied, before taking his hand off of Bakugo's shoulder and walking away. Bakugo, in response, stomped over to the electricity user, and gripped the boy's collar tightly. Alright you fucking extra. You want a G. Bakugo screamed, before being cut off by Yaoyorozu. How about Ground Zero? She suggested. What about it? He replied, beginning to lift the now tearful Kaminari in the air. As a hero name. Like the center or starting point of a powerful explosion, such as the ancient nuclear explosions used in World War II against Japan. She replied. Bakugo blinked, a little confused by the history knowledge, turning to Izuku for clarification, who simply nodded in confirmation. Bakugo dropped Kaminari, who promptly kissed the ground, and turned towards the raven-haired girl. She gulped nervously, and was on the edge of turning tail, and fleeing the blonde boy's harsh glare, when he grunted in response. Sure. It's better than this fucking dunce's idea. Bakugo replied, turning back towards Izuku. Yaoyorozu let out a sigh of relief and turned back to conversation with Jiro, who decided to tease the raven-haired girl. This was unbeknownst to Izuku, who was talking to his brother as they had now settled on their hero name and internship location. Best genus? Izuku asked, trying his best not to laugh as he had read online about what had happened to some students who had interned there. Yeah. Bakugo replied, he's the strongest of the heroes who sent me an internship request, so I look forward to learning from this strong. Yeah, you do that, Izuku snickered before quickly turning away as to prevent his brother from retaliating. Iida. Who are you going to internship with? Probably the normal hero. Manuel and Hosu. Have you decided yet, Izuku? Iida replied, with a thin smile and ignoring the Bakugo who was raging slightly in the background. No, I'm thinking maybe Hawks, but there's just so many to choose from. Izuku replied, what about you, Uraraka? Well, I'm lacking in combat so maybe gunhead martial arts. Uraraka replied, sifting through her few papers. And if Izuku knew that Bakugo liked the name Yaoyorozu had given him, he didn't mention it. Eventually the end of the day came, and Izuku, along with his classmates, had all submitted their internship forms, and Aizawa-sensei looked ever so slightly more irritated than usual, evidently. He was not looking forward to the excessive amount of paperwork that came with this part of the year, and he dismissed them all. Izuku still had a fair amount of energy and Bakugo was as irritable as ever, but on the way home the two of them interacted as uniquely as only they could, with insults, teasing, death threats and compliments, no surprises for who gave what, and once they returned home they informed their mother what happened. She, ever so lovingly, told them the house would be perfectly quiet without you two causing a fucking ruckus as she made the boys help her make dinner and set the table, before eating with them, and allowing them to do whatever the fuck it is you kids do, whilst not being hooligans. The two promptly left the room as to not aggravate her, as they went to their respective rooms with the intent of studying various subjects, before both completed their nightly routines and retired to the comfort of their respective sheets for the night. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.